Welcome back, everybody. For the next speakers, we have Stefan and Xavier, who will present us their work in an Ada UI, or well, I should say several of them, several iterations of graphical user interfaces. So, off you go.
Thank you. In this presentation, we are going to talk about a five-year journey with an introduction to the work done so far, then the presentation of a new KISS Ada graphic user interface, and a conclusion on the work to come. Our company, so WebBio, is a company with two complementary activities. On one side, a multimedia web and SaaS agency, and on the other, an IT engineering service called Soneo, where we practice outsourcing, server clustering, virtualized instances, cloud escaping, industrial management and embedded development, and at the end, electronic design, including microcontrollers programming. Our own high-performance servers cluster is used to host our website and SaaS, enabling us to achieve negligible operating costs for our hosting business. Xavier and I ran Soneo. Our skills complement each other. In terms of computer engineering, the only language we use is one of a kind. Whatever the projects described above, from clustering to embedded programming, we only use one language. But I am not going to tell you which one. It's up to you to guess. Before describing our path to LibreFrame, I'd like to talk about our definition of KISS. A framework must be designed to be understood by a single person within a minimum of time, so one can quickly create self-contained, simple, and productive applications. The quest for simplicity consists in selecting the real needs and limiting oneself to sufficient functionalities. This limitation is not pejorative, but a manifesto of lightness. We should behave like craftsmen, not geniuses. In IT, you have to avoid geniuses. I am a victim of geniuses. This is, working with geniuses is a pleasure, really. Today, to build an application, a single person has to master an incredible house of cards full of languages, concepts, protocols, procedures, best practice, dialects, templates, and tricks. This mastery is difficult to acquire, and we have to be renewed on a regular basis, even if the novelty is not justified by productivity gains. There is too much of everything. You need to create web SaaS with a development environment, then create Android app with another, and finally create iPhone app with a third. And be modern. To be at the cutting edge, don't forget to migrate your application written in Java to Kotlin, or from Objective-C to Swift. One day, we sat down by the side of the road, asked ourselves the right question, and choose this very secret language. Could we do the same for a framework? We developed the V22 framework that served as the foundation of our servers cluster manager. So, right, just fine. Then we developed a V22, a GP framework, with much broader ambitions encompassing web development according to a philosophy that avoids the use of HTML, JS, CSS, L by defining straight in the code blocks and subblocks of graphic elements, the latter automatically arranging themselves on the screen according to the terminal used. We are going to take a little time describing V22 as LibreFrame takes over most of its features, with the notable exception of the graphic user interface. When developing an application using V22, we used to eat our own dog food in order to continuously improve both the application and the framework. To deploy application, we use GNAT Remote, our deployment utility for Alaya projects. It manages two dev and prod branches and restarts Linux services via systemd. Here's an example of the action performed for the vending machine telemetry server dev branch. At first, it backups sources, then remote copy and remote build, and finally, remote service restart to handle the new fresh binary. The V22 framework handles all practical aspects of software development, making life easier for developers. It supports post-mortem traces, multi-level logs, configuration files, file management, directories, and searches. The console interface handles text I/O, integrates cursor management, colors, and various animation effects. The web interface, based on Gnoga from David Botton, adds and maintained by Pascal Pignard, adds users management, integrates high-level CRUD functions, as well as menus and common widgets, including responsive screens, to offer a consistent interface on all devices. SQL handlings include key value store for application-level parameters, high-level CRUD functions, and the most important part, managing database schema updates, making deployment of new versions a breeze. There is a lot of description, I go on. For UTF-8 handling, V22 use UX strings package from Pascal Pignard. I think there is a presentation this afternoon with Pascal. Its speed and ease of use is a foundation for V22 KISS spirit and enable us to to process big data with files up to hundreds of gigabytes. It's very important for our programs. Finally, the V22 reference manual is around 300 pages long. It comes with an 100-page user manual for the development environment, including a layer with a few exclusive details to help you understand it. Now, the retext. So Soneo has developed a vending machine management application which consists of 3 Linux services. A telemetry server with hundreds of devices in a VPN over LTE network, a web application for users and administrators, a background service sending SMS or email and making email for alerting temperature, alert, etc., and making financial and inventory consolidation. This application features over 8 CRUD and more than 50 screens, and also lists and reports. Without V22 dependencies, the application alone is coded in just over 7,000 lines in 42 files. The web interface is only 400 lines. 50 screen, 8 CRUD, only 400 lines. The web application can also be embedded into generic smartphone apps to its user. Results. We are now able to draw some conclusion. The development of this 7,000 lines project, free services, validates our design choices well beyond our expectation. Fewer lines of code mean fewer bugs, less time coding, and less stress. Maybe more sunbathing or as you. The V22 framework requires no HTML, JS, CSS knowledge, and the interface elements are safe placing with responsive management. In this environment, productivity is outstanding, ensuring a remarkable competitive edge over the competition. By freeing ourselves from Android and iPhone specific development, we can cut our sales proposal by a factor of 3. That's exactly why we won the vending matching contract. It's on a PC and on smartphone. It's the same. The responsive mechanism is automatic. You have nothing to program to obtain this result. While V22 has exceeded our expectation, we can do even better. After intensive use and dogfooding, we have identified several areas for improvements in terms of refactoring, internationalization, SQL extension, and the subject of today, graphical interface. It's now time to introduce our new framework, which was called V25 before being renamed LibreFrame, since we believe we can build on it for the long term. LibreFrame represents the last iteration before we pivot our development towards higher level softwares. It takes up the essential of V22 framework and incorporates the improvements mentioned above. LibreFrame's innovation lies in its brand new graphical interface, coded from scratch, and I'm pleased to hand over to Xavier to present it to you.
So what is it? It's a client-server GUI system. The server hosts the entire application logic, so all the ADA code is on the server side. It's called server-side scripting or rendering in a web context, usually. So the clients are just user-facing windows that the user sees. It can be a GTK window, SDL window, a terminal window, or even a web page on a smartphone. So you can think of this system as a graphical terminal, basically. For it to work, there is a user-agnostic protocol for communication. So the client and the server use the same protocol to talk to each other. The protocol must be server-agnostic. It doesn't care about the language or the platform they use. So you can even switch clients. It's not a low-level graphic system, so it's not like the X-Window system. There is no notion of pixels, mouse position, or stuff like that. It's higher level, it's at the widget level. It helps with performance and latency sensitive things. So you can think of it as a GUI toolkit over a network, sort of. So it supports only widgets like buttons, checkboxes, images, GUI elements. That's it. So I have a beautiful collection of scroll bars that existed over the time. It's not exhaustive, right? I would like to ask you, what's the best looking scroll bar, objectively? Maybe you can make a poll, but my point is everyone has their own opinion, because I asked some people already and nobody agrees. So that's why in this system, the client controls the look and feel of the widgets. Widgets haven't changed much, I think, in the last decades in functionality. We saw some new widgets like the toggle button for Wi-Fi on smartphone, but it's essentially a checkbox with a different meaning for the user. So I think we should let the user choose the look and feel of the application. That's a good benefit if you have a client, if you can exchange a client. So yeah, I choose user over developer for this thing, for the look, for the design. I think developers, it's a bit contentious, shouldn't control fonts, spacing, or scroll bar visibility. Because, for example, myself, I disagree with the current status quo that is ever changing. I don't know if you saw the news a few days ago, but Apple is bringing back Windows Vista transparent, translucid widgets. So, yeah, it's a circle. So yeah, and I think, I have no proof, but I think it creates a lot of mental load, especially if you use a lot the web. All the design is different, so yeah. So my idea is that when you first start a client, you have a setup screen where you can choose a theme, font, spacing, UI density, zoom, and later on it remembers that and you can change it at any time. Just like in modern video games, you usually have some accessibility settings in the start. Do you want subtitles or not, etc. Yeah. So, but it's a work in progress. Okay, it's just a proof of concept right now. So there is no beautiful design, no theme, only one client. So yeah, just an idea for now. Here, how it looks for two simple examples. So you have the command line one. It's a Unicode art, not ASCII art, and the web client. So here the CLI is emulated. The demo is very simple. It works the way you expect. If you click on the button, the 0 becomes 1. If you click again, it overflows because computers are binary machine. Web client, it can run on the same computer or on a different one. And this is the code corresponding to the example before. So you have a global variable on the first line. We start simple, later on there were different ways to manage state. On line 3, you can see that you have a subprogram. It normally takes more argument, but for this example, for simplicity, I show only one. So the library will call this procedure very often. Each time it needs to redraw the interface. So on line 5 and 7, you can see two widgets, one piece of text and one button. So each widget in this library is a subprogram, either a function or a procedure. Interactive widgets like buttons, checkboxes, etc., sliders, are all functions returning a boolean. So here it's a button, it's a function returning a boolean. Yeah, so there are no signals, no callbacks, no event handlers. It's not very classical. You don't manage listeners or hook into events. This is called an immediate mode GUI. Maybe you heard of it. So unlike written mode like GTK, the UI persists where the UI persists and gets updated. Here you rebuild the whole UI each time, basically. So this is how it works. Before everything, you have a server and client do a handshake. Then you have the library that called redraw window, as we saw earlier, to redraw everything from scratch. The second step is to compute the difference between the new and the previous widget trees. So the last time this function redraw window was called, did it behave differently? The system will compare the two executions and build a list of updates to send to the client, basically. And this is the step 3. You send updates, just the updates needed to modify the UI and put it in the state that you want. So in the end, the diff equals, it's the same. And you repeat it for every client Windows. Maybe I will disable that, but I think it's cool. You'll see later what it means. And then you wait for an incoming event. So it's usually a user interaction, a user has clicked on the button, and you repeat the process. So it's pretty classical. This is a longer version because I introduced a new concept called view. So each window can have multiple views. And you can see that I lied earlier, redo window is not a procedure, it's a function. And it's a function with a new argument called current view. And views is just an enumeration in ADA. And you can add a custom path or name for each enumeration value. It's used later on for display purposes. By default, the first view is used when you open the program. But if the client asks for another specific view, you can immediately jump to a new view. And as you can see on the last line, the 15th, it returns the next view to display. So here I'm displaying the same view, it's a loop. I could have written return login, I don't know, but here it's a fallback. The last return is a fallback. Otherwise, you can see on the line 9 that I return the main page from the login page or view or screen. They are synonyms. Yeah. So why I use views to instantiate the UI generic package? It's because the views are used for some widgets, like the breadcrumbs or navigation buttons. They want to know the enumeration values, the full views. So yeah, that's why. I don't see new widgets here. It's still text and button because I wanted to introduce the view concept only on this one. Hopefully you can read the code. Yep. So earlier we saw a global variable, but there are different layers where you can put your variables and your data. It's top bottom. The first one is a global one. It's application wide. So the library doesn't manage this. So for example, a database with a list of username and password is sort of global data. Then you have client data. Client data is a record you pass to a package. I'll see later. I'll show you later the code. Client is data common to every Windows for a client. So you can think of it as a session or a browser user profile. For instance, you can put a logged in boolean, is logged in boolean in this record to know if a user is connected or not if you have this kind of application. The window only is state that persists only until a window is closed. So in the web client, each browser tab counts as a window. The view is even more specific. Data linked to a view exists only until you change to another specific screen. If you navigate to another window, or if you close another view, sorry, or if you close the window, it disappears. So you have unbounded strings, for example, for login and password, you will put this in the view data. And widgets don't store their data. They access data layers above, basically, with in-out or access parameters. I'll show a good example later. So if it helps, I don't know, I try to make a diagram where you see server, client, window, view, and widgets to see where it fits. And you can see that the server is composed of the application with the LibreFrame library, so another package. And you can see the client-server dialog with updates in one side and in one direction and events in the other. So yeah, each server can have multiple clients, each client can have multiple windows, and each window can have multiple views, etc. This is a complete signature this time, I promise. So there are two new parameters, client and window, and they contain the client data and window data that we just talked about. I may merge frame and window together using OOP. Right now, it's really straightforward. Window data is just a record you pass to a generic package. That's it. Same for client, actually. So I may do something a little bit more elegant and yeah, to reduce the number of arguments to 3. A word on the arrangement, the layout of the widgets. There is a special kind of widgets called containers, and containers hold other widgets. Otherwise, are not very special. Right now, there is only one container. It's a box container. It's inspired by a web concept called CSS Flexbox. Maybe you heard of it. It's a little bit simpler to use, but the idea is the same. It's a one-dimensional box. I'm sure the same exists in all UI toolkits. Qt, is that how we pronounce it? Qt, GTK. So yeah, you can have vertical or horizontal boxes, and you have some element settings, spacing settings, and stuff like that. So to do 2D alignment, it's a bit trickier. I might add a grid container later. And you have a separator widget to create spacing between widgets if you need to. This is like an esquisse. With boxes, you can do this kind of stuff. Basically, you have widgets inside. So, next improvements. I might improve the API using object-oriented programming. Right now, there is only a few tag types, not a lot. You can't close the server cleanly. Right now, it's really a work in progress, so I need to add an option, a procedure to do that. I also want to improve the widgets, the existing ones, and to add more widgets. Right now, it's a bit limited. I would also like to link some widgets to other types. For example, if you have a text field, it would be cool to have a version of text field that takes a generic bounded string package. And for integer fields, I also want to use generic. Right now, it's just using the standard predefined integer type. You can pass, you'll see later, min and max, so you can restrict the range of an integer if you add an integer field, but it doesn't automatically use a generic type, which is, should be done. I also want to add more clients, so one that is in text mode, SDL and GTK also, and improve the existing web. Right now, the existing web client doesn't reconnect. If you lose the connection, you have to reload the web page. So yeah, I want to add that. And to improve server performance and reliability. So it's using a JSON for data exchange. I should use a binary protocol. I also can add cache and compression. Did nothing for now. I use a very simple diffing algorithm. I could also improve the diffing algorithm. Yeah, stuff. A lot of little improvements, basically. Yeah, and I don't check for XSS vulnerabilities in the web client for now, but I'm not worried. I know how and where to check. But I don't handle invalid data coming from the client. Right now, it raises an exception, so the program crashes, basically. So I need to do something cleaner about that. I also have a bunch of memory leaks, but yeah, it's in development. Maybe in the far future, we could use Spark to add some formal code verification in some parts of this application. Okay, so now it's demo time. How many minutes is left to do?
You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
Including questions and answers.
Including, okay. Alors, let's mirror screens. Whoa. Keep. Okay, so this is the code for the first example.
Could you increase the font size?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. Look, is it good? I think it's okay. So this is the complete code. Well, actually, no, you have two other files. This file that is almost empty, just run this procedure. And this package is almost empty also. So everything is in the body of this package. And you have the enum, the first instantiation, a null record, that is used as a parameter for client and window because we don't store data at this layer. You have the counter global variable, the text and the button that increment this, and you have a final package instantiation where you put the client data, window data, and the procedure. I will start this example. Zoom. Whoops. It doesn't work. So this is a demo effect, and it crashes. So why? Okay, I know why. I know why. Oh my god. Up index where? No, index in. Okay. Not writing. Okay. Let's fix it. So, yes, this is the button. Let's go to a more interesting example one. This is a temperature converter, Celsius to Fahrenheit and Fahrenheit to Celsius. It's bidirectional. So maybe I launch the demo first, so you can see how it behaves, and then analyze the code. So you have two sliders. 20 degrees Celsius is not the temperature in the room right now. So let's put it to 29, maybe, I don't know. And you can see that it updates Fahrenheit immediately, and it works in both ways, basically. And it's not a long code. You can see that the subprogram is not doing a lot. This function integer field will return true if the user has interacted with the Celsius integer field. So we update the Fahrenheit value, which is just an integer, a global variable, and this will automatically update the second field. So they both update themselves. There is another example with constraints. Just show it right now. This is just to illustrate some constraints. So I can book a one-way trip, but if I put a round trip, right? If I clear one field, for instance, you can no longer, the button is disabled and you have some error messages. So, and if I put, for example, the departure to the 20, I can only select a return date after the 20. It's not very clear in the Firefox 10, I think. In Chrome, it's a bit better, but if I click on 19, it doesn't work. I have to put at least 20 or 21. And yes, the return date is disabled if I put back the one way. So there is a little bit more of code, and you have unbounded strings for that. Yeah, this is the complete code. So I don't have much time to detail that. Sorry. You have an option field. This is a radio button where you can choose the travel type. The travel type is just an ADA enum, which is here. You have a group, two date fields. You can see that the first date field will start from today, and the second date field, the return date, will start from the departure date if the departure is not unset. I will make that cleaner. I don't like this unset time, but whatever. And yes, there are the error messages with some check, and the book button is only enabled if the departure is set, or if we are in a round trip and we have the return date that's set. Some Boolean condition. So let's go to the next example. The views one. Here you have 3 views. I have a lot of imagination, so I found good names for them. First, second, and third view. And this is the corresponding code. No. This is the corresponding code. So yeah, here you have a container. You have actually a box, which is a header. And in the header, you can put the 3 view buttons, first, second, third. And if one returns true, it means that the user has interacted with it. So you immediately interrupt the subprogram and go to another. Then you switch over the current view. And this is where you can have you can build different UI depending on the view. So yeah, you have a little bar on the first which is here, text on the second, and that. State, yeah, maybe I can go to the state also. Yeah, this is a demo to show you the different layers of data. And I open a private window. Okay, so you can see. If I click on a button somewhere, okay, the demo is still, okay, now say. If I click on the button somewhere, you can see that it updates all windows for the same client. Yeah, it's pretty explanatory. So you have a global variable here that is not updated for other clients, but we are at 17. And you have data that is only true for the client or the window. So yeah, the code for that is state. This is what it looks like. You have some new ADA syntax. Maybe some of you will raise an eyebrow. So this is I++ in ADA, but it's more clever because you can reuse the left-hand operator of the statement. I don't have the correct term on the right side, so it's pretty cool. And yeah, and I have more demos really. Maybe I'll skip the widgets one. It's not the most interesting. Just a bunch of widgets available. On the left, you have the different parameters, and on the right, you have the result. And you can update everything on the left to have things on the right. You can customize label options in real time, and the code is really simple. The code corresponding to this example. There is this line in the code somewhere. Maybe I can show the code corresponding to that. Widgets. Up. So this is all the variables at the window. It's the window data, so all the variables for each window. A little procedure helper to create each row with left-right aligned very well. And then separated by an empty line, you have each thing, including the option field. Yep. So, and last example, complete, I think. It's the biggest example I have. It's almost like a SaaS, and I was trying different things. There are like 10 or 15 line of code corresponding to this. So it's really easy to build UI with this kind of paradigm. Yep. So you can log out. And one neat thing about this is if you log in, all your tabs are immediately updated. So if you log in, log out, it works, it's consistent. And let's say I'm on a special view, for instance, I'm in example. If I log out and log in back, I'm still where I was before. It's compatible with the web. So if I open a new tab and I put some special URL, I'm immediately right where I should be. And I think that's it for now.
It's all in WebSocket, no HTTP.
Yeah, once you're connected, it's a socket, it's a WebSocket. Not technically the same thing. So yeah, it's a socket with a message framing, and yeah, so it's kind of fast. I can show you maybe some latency, but I don't know if I have time. How it behaves with lag. Let's put some network throttling 3G, for instance. I use a counter example, it's simpler. Let's load the page. Yeah, the page, yeah, the login page is a bit long. 404 not login. Oops, I forgot to zoom again. Okay. Okay, it's too fast, but let's use another more heavy demo. Temperature, maybe? And let's... I don't have anything slower. Yeah, no, it's too fast. There is some flickering because... Let's put 56, 500. Okay. Let's switch to something really slow. I hope. Okay, you can see when a user interacts with a widget, everything is disabled. You can't do anything else before you receive an answer. So I'm never handling two events at once. It's really one event at a time. For simplicity reason, for a lot of reasons actually. And I think it is acceptable with good optimization, good heuristics, good algorithms, it can work. I think with the widget-heavy UI. And that's it.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So my question is, if you've got a widget where only like a part of the information is displayed, for example, let's suppose it's just like some rows of numbers, and you've got maybe 100 rows displayed and 10,000 invisible rows.
Yeah.
Then on the server side, if you're having to sort of, let's say 1,000 rows.
Yeah, it's a lot of data.
It's a lot of data. If you knew which bits were visible, then it would be cheaper because it would only have to update. And then if the user scrolls, at that point it could generate the current set of visible rows. Do you support this kind of thing?
So you're talking about the load on the server, not on the client, right?
Yeah, on the server.
For the diffing. Yeah, there are various heuristics or tricks to optimize this process. I'm not too worried because this is actually how React works, the JavaScript library that powers a lot of UI we have on the web right now. They are making a diff, and if you have thousands of new elements or modify elements, it will quickly compute the set of updates you have to do.
Yeah, but it does that in the client, right?
Yes, but so yeah, theoretically, it adds some server load. So if you have 10,000 of concurrent users, maybe the server CPU will work a lot. But I'm not too worried about that because there are a lot of performance improvements that are possible. I have to prove it. I have not run any benchmark for now, I know. But I'm not too worried about that because I think there are a lot of catching also strategies that I can put in place to do that. But here I have 100 lines, and so if I remove 100, it's really fast because I only tell the client to remove 100 widget IDs. I have 32 bits IDs. So and I don't do data compression or anything like that, but it's quite faster to delete. But if I add 100 or 5,000 lines with a lot of text, because right now I don't catch text resources like Xwindow is capable of, I will have to send kilobytes of text potentially just because there is a new bunch of text on the screen and I just click. So yeah, if I'm not careful during this development, you can have an interface that is a bit sluggish. For instance, if I go to 3G here, we may show some latency. Yeah, so it's very quick to delete, but if I put, yeah, there is a delay here. It's quick to delete, but if I put 100 lines, it works a little. So yeah, I intend to make it faster.
If on your example on the server side you only generate simple lines, what if you have to retrieve from a database 10,000 of lines? If you have to do it each time you slide on the I mean, if you have to do it each time the user is sliding or is changing something, it means that on your database load, you will have
more pressure.
that many queries.
Yeah,
so there will be an issue on this side also.
It's a good question. I've thought about that, and it's in my to-do list. I don't have a real application like that for now, but as I will develop the first real application, I intend to add another layer to help with that, with the interaction with the storage system, so that we don't make a lot of database requests each time.
And we have one question online from Jose Alexis. And the question is, to use an app on Android devices, how does it work? Could this be used there?
Yes, for now it works, but it's just a web client because it's a web page. But we intend to add iOS and Android clients that are so-called native, that use a native UI to have something cleaner. Really, the idea is to have something that is a bit limited in what you can do, but cross-platform. So it's a widget level protocol. So I want to manage the lowest common denominator between all UI toolkits, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.